Oh.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy CMB, the ambassador, and you're back for another episode of Context 360, man. So glad that you could join us. We the tag team champions. Nah, just kidding. All right, just enjoying the field tonight. Been a good vibe tonight with the brother Alfredo. Welcome, man. Let's tell the people who you are, my friend.
What's going on, party people? It's Alfredo, aka the BK apologist, and you're now rocking with the best Context 360, the ray and ghost of urban apologetics. You heard?
You heard? All right, man. Welcome. As always, if you're listening on YouTube, hit that like button, hit the share button. And if you want to get first dibs, you subscribe and then hit the notification bell. And we get first dibs on the good from Context 360. As always, if you want to contact us, we love contact. Hit us up, right? Call us, email us, context360ua@gmail.com. You know what it is by now, context360ua as in urban apologetics @gmail.com. Also, you can hit us up at Twitter. That's @360_context. @360_context, or on Facebook. Look for us, put Context 360 in your search bar and look for the logo. You know what it is. Tonight, we got something extremely special tonight. Very popular subject, believe it or not. In some places, people get scared of this subject. Man, why don't you tell us more about it?
Well, I mean, as you've seen in preceding episodes, we've been touching upon, just the different ways to study the Bible, the different contexts. And we also talked about different resources. Now, of course, the number one resource in Bible study is your Bible. Right before anything else.
Imagine that.
That is the resource.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
So, but with that, we know that for many of us, we haven't been privy to learning, these ancient languages. Mm-hmm. So we have to rely on English translations of the Bible.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're going to touch on today. We're going to touch on the translation of the Bible, the process, the different ideologies when it comes to translating the scriptures, and just looking at the different types of Bibles that's out there that we can use for a better understanding of God's word. So,
dope.
Let me share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
All righty. So as you see here, there is a plethora of different Bibles to choose from. The NSAB, the New Living, Good News, what's that there? The Red Letter Text Edition that I know many of our people love.
That's right.
Which is all good. Nothing wrong with that. So we're going to get a little nerdy today. And we're going to look at the process and the different ways people do translate the Word of God. So, Colin, if you could do the honors of reading this for me.
Absolutely, my friend. It says the 66 books of the Protestant Bible were originally written in 3 different languages. Hebrew, that's most of the Old Testament. Aramaic, a sister language to Hebrew used in half of Daniel and 2 passages in Ezra. And Greek, all of the New Testament. And we assume that most of the readers of this book do not know these languages. This means, therefore, that one's basic tool for reading and studying the Bible is a contemporary English translation.
Right. So I don't want to use the word handicap, but we are kind of at a loss because we don't know these ancient languages.
That's right.
So we have to, rely, unless, you're a biblical scholar and you did your due diligence and mastered these languages, which I highly recommend because there's nothing like reading it, from its original context. Right. But, a lot of us don't have the time or the money to do that. So we have to really use these English translations, which are fine. But how do we go about the translation of these texts, right? The questions of language. Mm-hmm. The next 2 kinds of choices are verbal and grammatical. Bring us to the actual science of translation. The difficulty has to do with the transferring of words and ideas from one language to another. To understand what various theories underlie our modern translations, you will need to become acquainted with the following terms. Before I even get to that, right, there's so many different things that go into translating because it's not just the words, right, but how the words were being used.
Correct.
Is it being used in a formal setting? Are they using idioms and slang? You know, example I always love using is if I said to you, you know, me and the homeboy scraped off to the Iron Horse and bounced over the CI.
Right.
Right. What did I just say?
I have no idea.
Now, if you take what I said as is, you'd be like, okay, some boys in a home, this scraping, and they found an Iron Horse that I guess was kind of rubbery because it bounced.
It bounced, right.
And it went to someplace named CI, right? Now, in order for you to understand what I said, you would have to understand where that was coming from at what time as well. So if you lived in Brooklyn in the 80s.
In the 80s.
The south side of Brooklyn.
All right, south side. Even more
south side of
Brooklyn. I love it. Go ahead.
Then you will understand what I said, which me and my friends went on the train to go to Coney Island.
There you go.
That's all I said.
That's all you said.
Right? And or another one, you know, when someone says something stupid, we'll say, give that guy a gill, right? Gill was short for Gilligan. Right?
Gilligan, right?
From Gilligan's Island. If you're familiar with Gilligan's Island, you know that the skipper, every time Gilligan would say something stupid, the skipper would take his hat off and hit him in the back of the head.
Yep.
Right? So in the hood, we call that a gill.
Okay. Gotcha.
Now, mind you, that's Brooklyn talk.
Brooklyn
if you go to Harlem, they don't use that.
Right. Okay.
Right. So you got to know the borough, the time. Now, mind you, this is the 80s quoting a series that came out in the 70s.
There you go.
So you see all these layers you would have to have in order to translate what I said correctly.
So yeah, you'd have to know some sort of cultural context then.
Absolutely. You know, so with that being said.
We knew. Right, exactly.
Colin, you can read this, please.
Yes, sir. Says the original language. That would be the language that one is translating from. So in our case, Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek. For convenience, we will usually just say Hebrew or Greek. Receptor language. That would be the language that one is translating into. In our case, English. Or historical distance. And that has to do with the differences that exist between the original language and the receptor language, both in matters of words, grammar, and idioms, as well as in matters of culture and history.
Right. So if we was to use like the example that I gave, right, the original language was English, but it was a slang, right? The receptor language is to say what I said in 2019 terms.
Right.
The historical distance is we're taking it from the 80s to the 2000s.
There you go.
Right? With the understanding of idioms as well as matters of culture and history. Right? So you would have to know the time, the borough, the part of the borough, the references, all that in order for you to properly translate what I said to a modern day audience. Right?
There you go.
You want to add anything, bro?
No, it makes sense, man. Keep rolling. I love this. Looking good.
All right. So one way to translate here is called formal equivalence. It attempts to keep words, structure, and figures of speech as close to original as possible. Could you read the rest there, bro?
Yes, sir. It says the attempt to keep as close to the form of the Hebrew or Greek, both words and grammar, as can be conveniently put into understandable English. The closer one stays to the Hebrew or Greek idiom, the closer one moves toward a theory of translation, often described as literal. Translations based on formal equivalence will keep historical distance intact in all points. That's good. So the problem here, however, is that understandable English is not the goal of good translation. Rather, the goal is good contemporary English that is comparable in language and meaning to the original author's intent, as much as that can be determined from the context.
Right.
Man, that's a lot.
That's a lot. That's a heavy burden on the translator, right? Because it's not just the form, it's the flavor. Right. Like how they said it, the swag in which these things were said.
Yes, sir.
In fact, me saying swag makes sense only now. If I would have said swag in 1985, like, huh? What you talking about?
Right.
So even that is an example, right, of a formal equivalence. We see this all the time, a lot, especially in the Old Testament, when all of a sudden the structure changes and the Bible's written like as a form of a poem, stanzas as opposed to paragraphs. That's what's happening there, because when they look at the original, well, not the original autographs, we don't have that, but when we look at the manuscripts, see, oh, this part of the passage is now becoming into a poem. So we got to keep that same form so that people, when they read it, they say, oh, okay, this is, they changed it up now. Now it went from narrative to poetry.
Right.
So they want to show you that, you know, so that we could keep, as we say, keep that same energy. Right, the same way they
right.
Here, we're gonna do it here, right?
Right, exactly.
So, all right,
yeah. And even that phrase that you just keep that same energy, that's more recent. You know what I'm saying? This is like 2019. We're recording right now in March of 2019, and this is something that has just probably come on the scene in pop culture anyway. You know, more recently than not. You know, so even like probably 10, 15 years ago, if you'd have said something like that, people would have been like, what you mean? Now we know exactly what you mean, right? But that's how that even goes to show how much language changes, right? So you got to do your homework.
Absolutely. Brother, if you could read this for us.
All right. Do you want me to do the
No, just do the actual definition. Yeah.
Okay, here you go. So functional equivalence, all right? Functional equivalence. The attempt to keep the meaning of the Hebrew or Greek, but to put their words and idioms into what would be the normal way of saying the same thing in English. The more one is willing to forego formal equivalence for functional equivalence, the closer one moves towards a theory of translation frequently described as dynamic equivalent. Such translations sustain historical distance on all historical and factual matters, but update matters of language, grammar, and style.
Right.
All right.
Formal equivalence will be considered. They definitely want to adhere and stay as close to the form of the text as much as possible. But by doing that, it could be a little stiff, the translation. Whereas the functional equivalence, it's more concerned about the flavor of what's being said, as opposed to being as literal as possible. You know, it's the idea is, if Moses lived in the projects in the 90s and Exodus occurred in the projects, how would Moses sound?
Right.
That's kind of the idea of a functional equivalent. You know, so, but when you do that, you do lose some of the literalness of the translation, because you're more into like, well, how do I say it now?
Right.
As opposed to, well, let me say it as close as possible to the original with a different language. Right. You want to add anything to that, bro?
Yeah, well, let me ask you a question, really.
Sure.
When we're talking about this, I'm thinking of something that I like to use even when I teach at church, right? So, for example, you know, if someone says it's raining cats and dogs, right? We understand that term, right? It was raining cats and dogs. But for people, if I was to translate that in French loosely, I haven't spoken French in a while, I would say something like, if it pleut, le chat et le chien, right? It's raining cats and dogs. That doesn't necessarily mean that felines and canines are coming out of the sky, right? So would that be more of like an update of the language and the grammar and style at that point? Or would you say it's something different?
I would say, okay, let's actually use English, right, for the example. So raining cats and dogs, let's say that's the original manuscript. A formal equivalence to raining cats and dogs would be, it is raining quite a bit, right? A functional equivalent to it's raining cats and dogs would be like, yo, it's mad raining, dude.
Right.
Because it's already in slang.
Right.
So the functional equivalent is like, well, we're going to just update the slang.
Gotcha.
Formal is, well, we're going to tell you, you know, in a proper manner what they were trying to tell you.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
So, yeah. So let's keep it moving. Then there's free translation, right?
All
The
right.
attempt to translate the ideas from one language to another with less concern about using the exact words of the original. The free translation, sometimes also called a paraphrase, tries to eliminate as much of the historical distance as possible and still be faithful to the intent of the original text. The danger here is that a free translation can easily become too free, reflecting how the translator wishes the concepts would have been conveyed, rather than reflecting faithfully how they actually are conveyed in the original text. Colin, do you know of a particular Bible that fits this description?
Sounds kind of like maybe the Message or the NLT. That
Go.
sounds
Exactly.
sounds
The
kind of
Message
like that.
Bible is exactly that. And there's been other people who've done Bibles, using broken English. Actually doing like a hip hop translation.
Right.
That will be considered a free translation. Right.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Which is cool. It's a great way to try to update. But at the same time, as this passage says, there is some concern that, you get a little loose and free with the translation. All of a sudden, the theology and doctrine changes.
Right. Yeah. I think that's, it's really heavily reliant upon the translator.
Right.
Or the team of translators. And I think that we have to be careful with a lot of these modern ones. And it's kind of funny that you mentioned that a lot of folks are coming out with these Bibles that are have a lot of baggage. Right. So something like the Queen James Bible, for example. If you've not heard of that, check it out.
They're taking order what, the male verbs out of the text and all that crazy.
Right. So there's a lot of freedom that people are taking with these things. So just kind of pay attention to where you're getting your stuff from.
Right. But at the same time, I have the Message Bible. It's interesting. I would definitely not use it if I'm doing deep study. But it is fun to read. To see how they take certain passages that you might have read a billion times, just to get a fresh perspective.
Sure.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
So here we have a chart, right, of the three things that we just talked about: the word for word, the thought for thought, and the paraphrase, right? The formal equivalent, the functional equivalent, and the free translation.
Right.
So
way out there.
Way out there. You might see your favorite translation here, and you can see where it stands. What do you like? What translations are you favorable to, Mr. Ambassador?
I'm glad that you asked, man. Because I grew up old school, man. So we was King James only, for a long time when I grew up. And when I got older and I saw different kinds of translations, we had a pastor when I was probably in middle school. He's an associate pastor, and he started using the NIV, and people started having a cow. You know what I mean? So it was kind of weird to see that stuff. But like, it kind of introduced me to different ones. So the things that I use now, most of all, for my personal study, for me personally, when I think of Bible verses, I think in King James English because that's how I was raised, right? But for me, I really enjoy the NASB. I really enjoy the ESV quite a bit as well too. At our church is it's kind of an interesting location in Ohio, and we're actually in Dayton, Ohio. My church is. You've been there before, brother, so you know where it's at, and it's right in the middle of the hood. And some of the folks are old school Christians, and some of the folks ain't never stepped foot in the church before they start coming to our church. So we do use the Christian Standard Bible, the Homely Christian Standard Bible, as the Pew Bible, because a lot of the English is fairly easy to understand for a lot of people that aren't used to King James, right? And so it's easy to study and understand. So I read quite a bit of that as well too on my own. But I love quite a few of these different translations. What about you, sir?
Yeah, I mean, my church, we like to use the NIV, and I think it's good for a church just to use one particular translation when it comes to their service.
Right.
So that everybody's literally on the same sheet of paper.
Yes.
So when they turn, everybody's reading the same translation, so nobody's lost. But when it comes to, my own personal Bible study, I mean, I definitely use the NIV, but I've been looking a lot at the ESV. I like the Amplify a lot. I like the NASB. I actually do like it stiff because I like the idea of, it's getting as close to how the actual manuscript must have sounded like. So I like that. So even though it is stiff, but I do like the fact that even though it's the closest I'm ever going to get to reading, you know, the Hebrew, the Aramaic, you know.
Right.
And of course, the interlinear is probably, you know, definitely one of my favorites because it puts many of these translations together. So you can just look at it at a glance at how each one tackles a particular verse. You know? And the Message Bible is cool.
Right.
I actually do have the Message Bible. The Message Bible is cool.
Yeah, I got a couple of NLTs downstairs on the bookshelf myself, and you know, it's not a problem. You know, I think where the issue kind of comes in is that if we're using a lot of the paraphrase or closer to the paraphrase types of Bibles, and that's all you understand, so you're only getting the gist. You know, so like you said, I love how you said it. Like as far as using for deeper study, taking the time to wrestle with the passage, right? What I mean by that is, you know, taking the time to slow down your reading, you know, in the age of social media, quote unquote, microwave generation, all that kind of stuff, everything's super fast, on demand, you know, you just look at it, blah, blah, blah. You know, you look at social media, half the time we're just scrolling. We're not even really reading articles, even like news articles. We just look at the headline and like, react, you know, like, love, thumbs down, mad, angry, whatever. And we're not even looking at the actual content. And the fun part about this kind of thing is when you are slowing down your reading, something that may take a little bit more effort and time to digest and understand what you're saying, right? Or what the text is saying, rather, it really will cause you to study. It will really cause you to say, okay, what are they trying to say here? Let me go get this other resource. Let me go look at this this tool over here. Let me go get this Strong's, this lexicon, my vines out, all this kind of stuff, and start really digging. And that will cause you, next thing you know, you're half an hour on one passage. You know, you're 40 minutes into this whole section, and you're like, wow, I really spent some time in the Word. You know, and I think that's probably one of the things that is problematic in the church as a whole. You know, people are just biblically illiterate. They don't know. Right. They don't spend enough time in the Word. They don't know how to study. Right. You know. And real quick, I don't need to just run too far with this thing, man. But I did an informal survey, and some of y'all listening might have been part of it. But I did an informal survey on my social media on Facebook, man, and I got 29, I think, or 30 responses. And I asked a simple question: have you ever been walked through how to study the Bible? Have you ever been walked through? And it's up to 29 responses now, and only 2 people said yes.
Wow.
You know, and these people are people that have been saved. Some of these people are preachers. Some of these people, man, it's scary out here, bro. Wow. You know, so just kind of taking your time in the Word is super important.
Absolutely. And the fact that there's so many different ways in which you can do that, you know, it's almost akin to your wardrobe. You know, there's days where you feel like throwing on the fitted and the Timbs. And there's days where you need to throw on the tux.
Right.
You know? And scripturally, you kind of could do that, a similar thing, you know. If you're just reading devotionally, you know, it's more of a meditative thing. Perhaps a paraphrase would be better suited for that.
There you go.
You know, if you're getting ready to write a dissertation, chances are you're not going to use the Message Bible.
I hope you wouldn't.
Right. You're going to use translation.
Yeah.
The fact that we have choices today is just amazing. You know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy that. You know, of course, this is just a very simple overview. It's definitely a far more deeper conversation. There are many books just about the process of translating if you're into that kind of thing. But we just want to whet your appetite here so that you yourself can continue the conversation with you and your peoples wherever they are. You know what I mean?
Facts.
But yeah. So translations, you know, formal, functional, and free. So, any last words, Mr. Ambassador?
Nah, man. Thank you for taking the time out, man. I really appreciate it, man. I really learned a lot tonight. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Cool. So, with that being said, there's Alfredo, the BK apologist, saying peace.
All right, it's your boy CMB. Just glad to be here tonight from the great state of Ohio. Welcome.
Yes, sir.
All right, we out.
Context 360, we out.